Moving into the 20th century, major urban infrastructure projects continued to redefine humanity's relationship with the water system. Saltwater infiltration wasn't the only water quality concern in the 1900s. High rates of typhoid in Pittsburgh prompted the city to introduce sand filtration system in 1907 and water chlorination in 1912. Chemical contamination, however, would remain a mounting concern. Beginning in the 1920s, iron and steel mills began dumping slag at 9 Mile Run, a stream system now occupying the eastern portion of Frick Park. By the time they stopped dumping there 50 years later, the accumulation covered 96 hectares, with the largest mound reaching 36 meters high. The slag leaches toxic metals and treatment compounds into the water and soil to this day, swept away with each new inundation. And inundations remained a significant issue. Major flood events swept through the Allegheny Valley in 1883, 1907, 1936, and 1964. The 1936 St. Patrick's Day flood in particular peaked at 21 feet above baseline and caused the equivalent of $5 billion of damage in today's money. While by that point, the Allegheny already had 8 dams completed or under construction, these fixed crest dams and their single-chamber locks were designed to make the river more navigable, not control flooding. Constructed during the 1920s and 30s, they were only built to last 50 years, but are still in use today. The local government doesn't have the funds to maintain them, and the Army Corps of Engineers predicts it's only a matter of time before they begin to fail. Removing the dams is the cheapest and most likely option from here, but those plans have yet to take shape. In this penultimate chapter, I want to turn to the most significant dam along the Allegheny River, Kinzua. Kinzua Dam, located in the Allegheny National Forest, holds back the 27-mile-long, 120-foot-deep Allegheny Reservoir straddling the border between Pennsylvania and New York. Part of the flood control system authorized by Congress in 1936, plans for the dam didn't get moving until 1956, when the Army Corps of Engineers began surveying the site and surrounding area. That surrounding area was the territory of the Seneca Nation. I last mentioned the Seneca when discussing colonization with the Treaty of Canandaigua and Chief Coin Planter. But despite the US government's best efforts, they've been here the whole time. Remember those barges of lumber floating down the Allegheny River in the 1800s? An 1879 report on the Allegheny River by the United States Engineers Office also haphazardly notes that they were, quote, manned by half and quarter breed Indians, forming the remnant of Corn Planters' tribe, whose home is in New York. The Seneca, along with all the other indigenous communities living in the area, were marginalized at every turn of the American colonial project. From aggressive assimilation policies in public schools to exploitation in extractive industries, throughout this story, American Indians have faced a sustained systemic onslaught to erode their culture and undermine their sovereignty. By this point, the Seneca Nation had just over 4,000 enrolled members, of whom about 1,100 resided on the Allegheny Reservation, 1,800 on the Cattaraugus Reservation, and the remainder elsewhere. The plans for the Kinzua Dam were set to continue wiping the Seneca off the map. Once filled to capacity, the dam was projected to flood over 10,000 acres, or about a third of the Allegheny Reservation. 127 families residing in the proposed reservoir area, primarily in the communities of Jimerson and Steenburg. The federal government moved to acquire the land through eminent domain. The Seneca Nation, on the grounds that they were a sovereign nation, challenged the action in court in United States v. 21,250 acres of land, etc. The Seneca Nation grounded their legal defense in the Treaty of Canandaigua. The 1794 treaty affirmed a, quote, permanent friendship between the fledgling United States and the Haudenosaunee, and ceded the land in question, quote, forever, to the descendants of Chief Corn Planter. The federal judge found this unconvincing, as there was already more than sufficient precedent of the federal government taking lands from reservations via eminent domain. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers moved forward with the dam at Kinzua, with funds for its construction made available in the Public Works Appropriation Act of 1958. During the bill's formulation, Senator Irving Ives of New York made the observation, quote, by this action, we will be virtually wiping out the Allegheny Reservation of the Seneca Nation of the Iroquois Confederacy in New York State. I realize that under the procedure followed by the government of the United States over the years in handling of the matters concerning Indian reservations, the government has the legal right to do what is proposed. But what distresses me is the moral responsibility we have. Senator Ives voted for the bill. Construction moved forward. Regarding the, quote, responsibility spoken of by Senator Ives, the federal government responded in a historically consistent manner. In February of 1961, President Basil Williams of the Seneca Nation sent a letter to President John F. Kennedy of the United States asking for a re-evaluation of an alternative design and cease further construction. After a less than assuring response from the Deputy Director of the Bureau of Budget, in May, Williams wrote again, this time receiving a response from Kennedy 4 months later. Kennedy promised legislation to support the relocation of those displaced, which the U.S. government was already obliged to do, but promised nothing on the dam itself. That legislation took the form of H.R. 1794, passed in 1964. It allocated $2.4 million to the Seneca Nation and individual members, including compensation of houses and infrastructure, direct and indirect damages, along with $100,000 to cover expected increases in oil and gas drilling. It also created a fund of $12 million to, quote, improve the economic, social, and educational conditions of enrolled members of the Seneca Nation. This fund was to be jointly managed by the Seneca Nation and the Department of the Interior and forbid use of direct per capita payments. So, in exchange for their lands flooded, communities displaced, and rights as a sovereign nation violated, they got $15 million, $12 million of which was actually held by the U.S. Treasury and required approval from the Department of Interior prior to any use. The construction cost of Kinzua Dam was $108 million. The hydroelectricity generated from the dam was set to make back hundreds of millions during operation. Their land was taken for a pittance. And the U.S. government thought it was being generous. Senecas residing within the project had an average income of $3,894 per household during 1961. This compares with the average per capita income of $260 and $319 respectively for the Crow Creek and Lower Brule Sioux Indians, the most recent tribes to receive a legislative settlement for the lands taken in a flood control project on the Missouri River Basin. Maybe it's just me, but I don't think that citing that some people you marginalize have it even worse is a good reason to further marginalize the rest of them. In the end, over 600 people lost their homes, their property razed to make way for the dam. The plight was referenced in Johnny Cash's As Long as the Grass Shall Grow from his 1964 album Bitter Tears, Ballads of the American Indian. Every September, members of the Seneca Nation gather for the Remember and Removal Walk, a solemn procession from the Red House Bridge to the Steenberg Barricade. Within the last 10 years, the region has experienced a boom in natural gas production from the Marcellus Shale deposit that extends throughout the state. While easy-to-reach reserves were exhausted by the late 1890s, advances in hydraulic fracturing have opened up millions of cubic feet for extraction. This, quote, unconventional production injects water with a slurry of additives at high pressure into the shale to break it apart and release the gas found inside. Beyond rekindling fossil fuel production in the watershed, it has also provoked extensive environmental and human health concerns, from earthquakes to groundwater contamination. Have you seen videos of people lighting their tap water on fire? Some of those were shot in the Allegheny Basin. On top of the water contamination, recent findings have also identified PFAS source pollution from several sites in the upper Allegheny watershed and significant concentrations downstream. The data on this is still infant, but it will certainly be a significant part of the watershed story moving forward. On a more positive note, in 2015, Seneca Generation acquired the rights to the Kinzua power generation and pumped hydro facility. After nearly half a century, the nation is starting to receive continuing benefits from the infrastructure their inundated land enabled. The energy extracted from the basin's fossil fuel ascendancy is likewise coming full circle. Due to climate change, precipitation patterns in the watershed are expected to fluctuate over the coming century. While significant, the relative shift is projected to be less severe than many other areas of North America, positioning the watershed as a bastion of temperate climate and reliable precipitation for the foreseeable future. Pittsburgh is one of the most cost-effective cities in the country. Invest now. That's a joke, not financial advice. But also, if I wanted to own a home this century, I'd know where to look. Indeed, the Allegheny finds itself at the vanguard of many of the country's great transformations. As the gateway to the West, the birthplace of the oil industry, and potentially a corridor of temperate stability in the new carbon-neutral society, its meanders carry with them the stories of triumph, despair, of dispossession, and discovery. I just hope my tribute to this tributary did it justice.